Okay, back in the studio again. We are on GND 28, and we're going back into the energy sector stuff today. We've got co-founder, CEO of ShearFRAC, Andrew McMurray. Welcome.
Thanks, Kevin.
Awesome.
Great to be here.
How's things going? How was Fabricland? I heard you found the wrong office.
Oh, it was perfect. I don't get a lot of chances to go in there, but today I had a reason, and I got some fabric.
All kinds of creatures rolling around in there, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I don't remember the last time.
I'm very interested in what everyone else was in there for. I mean, my task was very specific. I was looking for some fabric to make some draft covers for my sliding doors.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
See?
Fill them full of beans and save some energy.
Day of purpose.
Yeah.
Happy to help out.
Thanks for having me.
Well, listen, good to have you here. And I wanted to let the listeners know that obviously we do lots of energy industry stuff. And we talk about it all the time. Like to try to keep it educational and casual. And so I thought today, maybe I'll give a quick, I like doing my 101s. So a quick 101 on what and how the energy sector works. So if you could just bear with me and interrupt anytime.
Sounds good. Go for it.
Stop me and say, wrong.
Probably not.
Probably not. But so for the listeners who aren't familiar with the energy sector, I guess the easiest way to break it down, I feel, is three sectors, essentially, upstream, midstream, and downstream. So among those three parts of the energy industry, there are subsets. So essentially you start, if you want to be at the top end on the upstream, you'd have your producer or exploratory. So essentially you'd start with your geo. The geo might be we call them the money guy, the geologist or a rock hound. They're the ones who are looking for that pay, the hydrocarbons trapped in the formations. So the geologist will find an area of particular interest where he thinks there might be a payout of whatever that is, gas, natural gas, shale, etc. After that, you've got landman. That's all the flavor these days. Landman, the show. It's all over the place, right? Landman's actually an abbreviation for land manager. And speaking of landman, this hat right here, Topaz Energy, former landman. Thanks, Fatso, for the hat. He's one of my best buddies, I can say that. He's the CEO over at Topaz Energy. But then after that, then you get into, once the landmen will acquire the mineral rights or surface rights to that area to attack for the pay, then you're gonna drill it. And we've talked lots in here about drilling. You have drilling managers at the oil producer, and then you've got drilling contractors that come in for the oil producer in the upstream side. Then you're going to complete the well. And the completions area is essentially you've drilled your well to TD or terminal depth based on that stick diagram that the producer has provided. And you're going to hit that pay zone, and then you're going to complete it, which is essentially, let's get the barrels of oil to surface, essentially, right? Then we're going to transport it via pipeline, which is where then we get into the midstream portion of the business. And the pipeline midstream guys would be like your Keyera, TransCanada, Enbridge would probably be the biggest. They got like a 30 billion market cap. I think Topaz are 2.8 Staples. Anyway, just to show you the scope and size. But then after that, so that's essentially transporting the gas or oil or whatever we're transporting via pipeline to all the businesses towards the end user. But then you've got downstream, which is like your retail and business outlets, which deliver those energy products to the masses. But in between there, because like I mentioned, subsets, sometimes we have trouble getting at the zones or getting them out of the formations, and we use what's called fracking. And fracking is sometimes controversial, and maybe we'll get into that, but that goes somewhere after you've cased your well, and then you need to frack it to get that to surface.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, I would call fracking kind of a subset of stimulation.
Okay.
So once you drill your well, you have a pressure vessel, and you need to get access to the formation.
Yeah.
Traditionally, we'd go and perforate or open up a sliding sleeve, and you get access to your formation. And in traditional conventional wells,
Going to stop you.
No problem.
Perforate, just for people. What does that mean?
Perforate means that we run an explosive charge into the ground that is controlled, that allows you to exit the cased wellbore. Okay. So casing is a very heavy wall steel pipe, and we need to be able to get past the casing and touch the rock in order to flow the hydrocarbons into the well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So perforating is a technique that can be used to then get access to the formation in behind pipe.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, before we get into what you do and what ShearFRAC does and all that good stuff, let's go down your path into where you are to co-founding this company, which, as I understand it, you've got some pretty cool software regarding fracking that you attach onto the frac system out there. Is that?
Well, yeah, we help watch the frac.
You help watch the frac.
Yeah, we help watch the frac and describe how that frac is behaving based on a low cost, non-invasive diagnostic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So what did you take in school?
So I'm from Calgary.
Yeah.
I was kind of born and raised as a Calgary guy. My dad was a geologist that worked in the oil field. I went to school on the east coast of Canada, a fellow Acadia alumni.
Yes, that's why he's here. Acadia. Victor, telling you. East Coast, best school ever.
So I did 2 years at Acadia and then went to Dalhousie. Was in the co-op program for mechanical engineering and cut my teeth in the Oilpatch. So every summer I was back in either places like Beaver Lodge or Pink Mountain operating oil and gas wells. So that's mostly in the midstream, upstream component of the business, where we're helping facilitate the transport of hydrocarbons from the wellbores to some sort of facility that's either refining the gas product, separating up butanes, propanes, ethanes out of the fluid and selling those as individual products, or refining sour gas and stripping the H2S out of the product because it's dangerous to then transport any further with that type of thing. Okay. So once I was done my mechanical engineering degree, I worked at Shell, which was an amazing experience. Got flown around the world, trained in Houston and the Netherlands, with the opportunity to see a bunch of different upstream and downstream components of the business. I focus mostly on the upstream component, so subsurface, everything from the rocks to the wellbore to the wellhead.
Okay.
So started as a production engineer working in heavy oil with progressive cavity pumps. So these pumps kind of are screw pumps, and they drive cold, heavy oil up the wellbore. And it's a pretty cool process. Did a lot of things in understanding how to predict the failure of those pumps and maintain the life cycle of that equipment so that you'd produce more. That's what a production engineer does.
And then you were on the heavy oil side of things. So would that be all kind of like northern Alberta, close like Lloydminster and those places around there?
Yeah, Peace River, Lloydminster.
Peace River, Lloyd.
Yeah. And they did both heavy oil as well as thermal production of heavy oil. So a lot of techniques will apply heat to reduce the viscosity of the heavy oil in order to produce it. Yeah. So if it's thinner, it moves easier, and you can get access to more of the hydrocarbon in place. I did both, cyclic steam or SAGD types of production optimization, as well as the cold side of the business with the progressive cavity pumps.
And SAGD, this actually came up in here before, and we had AJ, who was the other studio guy. SAGD, for the listeners, is steam assisted gravity drainage. I actually accidentally said drilling last time, but it's a way of running essentially two pipes down kind of parallel, or one on top of the other, and the heat on the top that heats it up, and then it drains into the second pipe that receives. Is my understanding of SAGD.
And again, we're using that thermal energy to help get the fluid more mobile, because it doesn't want to move in its current position.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So did that. And then at Shell, they kind of moved you around a bunch. Shell purchased Duvernay, which was the Montney play for Shell. And that get me some exposure to the completions and fracturing side of the business.
Oh, cool.
Which was really interesting because the production engineering side of the business had very small budgets. You know, you're making small changes, but you're not spending a lot of capital. There was a lot of planning. And so you'd plan and then you'd kind of do a small job and then you'd see the results, but the results don't show up instantaneously.
Sure.
Within the completions business, it's kind of like, you know, let's blow and go. Like we're spending
It's go time.
a couple $1 million on these wells in a couple of weeks of time. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of pipe in the ground. There's a lot of sand, moving parts. And I like that action of the business. So I fell in love with completions and specifically in hydraulic fracturing.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it too because I've just never dabbled on that side. I had to sell service rigs for a while. And when we say well servicing rigs for listeners, like you've got your drilling rigs and then you have your service rigs. And those are the rigs actually that you see on Landman, the show. They call them drilling rigs in the show, but they're
service
I'm
rigs.
sure all the people in the industry are like, well, that's not a drilling rig. Yeah, because they're doing workovers to try to, I guess, reactivate the well or get it flowing again properly, essentially on a workover.
Yeah,
right?
there could be a bunch of production damage mechanisms that cause the well to not produce at expected rates. And so you could actually go and reperforate. So just enter the casing again and get past some damage zones. You can do acid jobs or things that they'll clean up scale or paraffins around the wellbore that allow you to then actually flow that hydrocarbon more easily.
Okay. Yeah, it's super cool. I love it. Yeah, I don't know enough about that side. So I was curious, like, so growing up, your dad, Geo, like you must have lived it, seeing it every day, or did you?
Well, kinda. I mean, when he started his geo thing, when he ended his geo thing, I was probably 10.
Okay.
And then he got into kind of like M&A, and that stuff is pretty tight hole. So I didn't get a lot of exposure to his day-to-day operation, but really was an amazing mentor to me to help guide and direct me through my career on what I wanted to do. But I had to put in the time. I mean, the big thing that I did was I went out of high school, directly into university. Every time I had a break, I went and worked my ass off in the field.
Yeah.
And I got a brand. And that brand for me was very important. And I put my head down, spent 10 years prior to starting this business, setting myself up to take risk.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, we do talk about that a lot in here, about urging the younger gen to just get your ass out there, whatever it is, like head down, ass up, immerse yourself, even if you don't necessarily like it. I mean, it's established that work ethic.
I remember being at Acadia, and my girlfriend was like, "You're not working this summer because I want to spend the summer with you," and like crying. And my dad's like, "You're fucking going to work. Like you don't pass up on these opportunities." And once I did, and I tried to get a job, it was much easier once you had that kind of sacrifice up front. And I look back, and those are some of the best days. I mean, I remember being a city kid out of Calgary, working in Beaver Lodge, Alberta, on the Webo-Ludwig route. And so he was, I don't know if your listeners know much about Webo, but he was big anti-oil and gas. Ended up cementing in wellheads. I'd find Barton charts with shotgun shells in it.
Yeah, he's popular.
It's a bit of a disruptor. But it was a really cool experience because, you're this city slicker going into Beaver Lodge. And I remember going to the local hardware stores asking for muffler bearings and skyhooks. I mean, the guys got me. And
bag of steam.
Bag of steam. I mean, all those things I lived that.
Sure. And it's awesome.
And it was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, super funny. Looking back now.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, you're kind of like,
what an asshole. Why would you do that?
Exactly.
Because it's funny.
Yeah.
Relax.
Yeah.
And what years were you, you might have said it earlier, but what years were you there at Acadia and Dal?
I was at Acadia from 2004 to 2006.
Yeah.
And then Dal from 2007, 2009.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Young buck. Eh?
Yeah.
Did you like Dal? Or a big,
I loved Acadia.
Acadia's unreal.
Because you got kind of this melting pot of all these different students that are coming in from around Nova Scotia and the East Coast.
Yeah.
But your friends were not just engineers, because you had kinesiology guys or majors and biology majors or poli-sci majors. And then at Dal, you go into this like funnel, which is just engineers, because you're off campus at Dalhousie.
Oh, like lab rats.
Right. So you actually they migrate after the first 2 years of the main campus at Dalhousie down to what they called tons or Daltech.
Okay.
Back in the day, and that was more the technical institute, and that's where the engineering was. So at Dal, it was very, and you had engineering friends, and it was difficult to meet people outside of that.
Yeah. Well, it's a massive school too, right? You kind of become a bit of a number, I would suppose.
Well, I loved it. I mean, it was
great town. I mean,
it was a great town.
Yeah.
If I go back to the East Coast, I wouldn't heartbeat.
Me too. I flipped a coin between Calgary and Halifax. I did tell the story once, but I flipped the coin and Halifax won the toss, and I said, "Nah, I'm going to Calgary anyway," because I wanted to go to Hali, but I just knew opportunities would be here.
Yeah, just to even get out to school there, I was like, "How do I get as far away from this place as possible?" And just even that first night leaving and showing up at Acadia and trying to find my res and try to get in, like it was just the biggest learning experience I had ever had to date.
Right.
Yeah. Just getting away from school was an incredible opportunity. I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of what meal hall was. Thinking about food. I think I'm hungry. What was the meal hall called again? There at Acadia? I can't remember. Doesn't matter. Anyway, you.
So yeah.
But keep going.
So I did Shell. I did Shell. Did a field assignment in Fox Creek.
Okay.
So as a production engineer, they kind of gave you a broadening experience. So I got into completions, and as part of that broadening experience, I had a year in the field, and that's really where you got to see the operation take place. And so as that person, you're kind of shadowing the superintendents in the field or the WSMs, well site supervisors, or well site managers. And we were basically, exploring the Duvernay. This was the time when Shell was kind of a first mover in that area.
Yeah.
We were pumping these big gelled frac jobs, and it was just about getting sand and water in the ground as fast as possible. And I said, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Right. Sure.
But along the way, I got to meet some really, really cool people. And at that time, Step Energy Services was coming up with custom built coiled tubing rigs.
Yep.
And I remember the transition going from like a 2-inch coil rig with a small injector, a bunch of helical buckling, challenges milling out plugs, to like a 2 7/8 step rig with these oversized injectors, big coil reels. The efficiencies were there. The crews were incredible. And I said, well, they're doing something interesting and different. And I liked that.
Yeah.
So after that assignment, I ended up, emailing Regan Davis, who was the CEO of Step back in the day, and creating a role for myself in technology development. And so I ended up leaving Shell after that field assignment and going to Step. That would have been in 2014.
Yeah.
And I was with Step from 2014 to 2017. During that time, got to work on some really cool stuff like diverter product lines, fiber optic coiled tubing, intelligent coil systems.
Oh, wow. And so, you said you're on the tech side, like
I've been on the tech
R&D
side.
and tech. And
Right. Cross-applying technology from other industries into oil and gas.
Yeah, super cool.
Historically is what it's been. And so at Step, we were just a coil company, and then all of a sudden they bought GasFRAC when they went into
right.
Chapter 11, and then Sandgel equipment in Canada. And they became the largest privately held pressure pumping business. And ARC took them public in 2017. And I left shortly after that.
You took off. And then is that when you took your first crack at your own gig right after that?
Yeah, I took some big risk at Step. I mean, I was like, okay, well, if these guys are doing it, I mean, I might as well sell my house and put it all into Step. So I did that pre-IPO.
You did. Yeah.
And then ended up leaving. So I kind of I took on some risk and created some opportunity so I could take on more risk.
Yeah, just keep piling it on. Yeah.
So I ended up doing that. I worked for a technology scouting firm out of Texas. And that's where I found my business partners at ShearFRAC now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into ShearFRAC and maybe where the idea spawned from. I've gone onto your site again, like I said, and fracking not my world, but I've gone on and talked about I looked at some of your technology. But tell us how it started and came together.
So I'd like to try to kind of set the stage of hydraulic fracturing.
Yeah, please do.
And why we do it.
Yeah.
So historically, we could go into the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, whatever you want to call it these days.
Right. Yeah. I don't know why I'm laughing, but it's true. I guess.
And you could drill a well into like a really porous zone with lots of permeability and porosity. So permeability is the ease of fluid to flow through a porous media.
Yeah.
And porosity is the space within that porous media that you can store hydrocarbons. So if you can flow through it and you can store a bunch of it in there, it's great. You can stick a straw in there and it's like drinking a Slurpee, everything comes up.
Yep.
You don't need to stimulate that rock because the hydrocarbon molecules want to flow to the wellbore. As we started to then, drill up those more conventional assets with high permeability and porosity, we required more stimulation. And the stimulation fundamentally increases the area at which you're able to draw down the reservoir on. And so hydraulic fracturing was a breakthrough specifically in shales with low permeability and porosity, because we were able to go in there where these systems wouldn't historically produce and stimulate them effectively to produce them at commercial rates.
Got it.
Yeah. So what hydraulic fracturing is basically you're drilling a horizontal or vertical well in a tight rock, and then you're injecting high pressure fluid and proppant into the rock to increase that area that's greater than the drilling wellbore radius.
Yeah.
And that allows you to then get access or contact to all of this hydrocarbon in place and produce it at economic rates. And we do that in horizontal wells, 50 to 200 times.
Sure.
Where you isolate a small component of the well, you set a plug, you can perforate a new zone, you stimulate it with hydraulic fracturing techniques, which is pumping fluid and proppant at high pressures into this tight formation to increase fractured area, and you continue to do that at the wellbore. Once you're all done that lateral, some sort of coil or jointed pipe comes in, mills that out, and you have the ability to produce that asset.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah. So do you have any questions there on fracking?
Well, on fracking, just because I was thinking about because if any of that comes to surface, then they technically call that like a contaminated, or by the Alberta Energy Regulator, if any of that like kind of seeps through after we've fracked. I wanted to get into a little bit on contamination of water, and this is like the big thing that they like to say. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the formations that we're doing the bigger stimulations on are underneath a bunch of very integrous cap rock.
Okay.
So this means that we're in the Montney, for example, we're stimulating at like 2,200 meters TVD.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of other zones that are protecting the migration of fluids to surface.
Yeah.
However, in different areas around the world, there's hydrocarbons at surface already. And this rock fabric, and this we'll get into when we talk about ShearFRAC, this rock fabric really controls how hydrocarbons move in the subsurface. So there's pre-existing natural fractures and planes that are down there that have already been leaking hydrocarbons to surface for many years in different areas of the world.
Sure.
And in those areas, you'll see the guys lighting their taps on fire because they see these, fracking caused this, but most likely that's been happening for decades.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Within our industry in Alberta, there's not a lot of shallow hydraulic fracturing. So the shallower you get, the less there is, cap rock containment or isolation containment, with more risk that you can probably potentially break into groundwater aquifers. But in the drilling process, we set a surface casing and an intermediate casing below that groundwater to isolate and protect those zones. And the technology involved in that and the new cementing techniques are getting better and better to prevent any types of groundwater contaminations or surface casing vent flows or annular vent flows that can cause that type of contamination.
Yeah, I kind of just assumed that, especially here with the Alberta Energy Regulator and regulations, I just assumed it would be pretty stringent here and lower risk, I would imagine, but I just didn't know. So
we don't have the same sort of reservoirs at surface that they do in other areas of the world, where there's just like bitumen pits that are just sitting there bubbling.
But Pennsylvania, I guess they talked about, that was a controversy there, but I guess it's because they were drilling in like near residential or something. But I don't know the geology, so I don't.
Yeah, so that's the Marcellus and Utica shale.
Yeah.
And so, we have Montney outcrops in the Rockies that you can see. You can go and you can see an uplifted section of the Montney.
Right.
And you can take a drone and fly over it. Per Pedersen from University of Calgary has actually mapped these outcrops, looking at even within the same stratigraphic zone. So that'd be the same TVD. Yeah. You have different rock qualities along the lateral.
And you're talking TVD, like true vertical depth.
True vertical depth.
Okay.
So when you think about sequostratigraphy, stratigraphy is like a time that's been deposited deposited in a specific time frame. So normally we try to follow that stratigraphic layer when we're landing the wells. That's where the geologists want us to land the wells in a specific stratigraphic layer. But even across that same unit in time, there can be variations in rock fabric and the amount of natural fractures and pore pressure and all this types of other variances that we explore in oil and gas research.
That's pretty cool. I wouldn't, always learning in here. I wouldn't have known that about the Rockies and the Montney out there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, actually the Banff Springs Hotel is made out of the Montney. The rock on the Banff Springs Hotel is Montney.
Oh, you're kidding.
No joke.
Unreal.
Yeah.
That's
so
super cool.
that quarry we actually take samples from. And we have a partnership with the University of Toronto. And the University of Toronto, I mean, it sounds weird in Toronto that they do a bunch of hydraulic fracturing research, but it's one of the best laboratories in the world. I was there actually last week with Dr. Giovanni Griselli, touring the facility with a bunch of new sponsors, where we're dictating research on what happens and how to evolve academic research that gets applied in the industry.
Yeah, why is it in Toronto, I wonder? I mean, I guess they've got a lot of mining in Ontario.
They do, and it's at part of the
geos,
civil engineering department. It's more on how rocks fail. So they have this polyaxial load cell machine that can simulate principal earth stresses up to 40 kilometers in the ground. And so we do a bunch of research there on how that rock is failing, what controls that process, and how can we measure it better.
Right. Super cool. So you
so ShearFRAC.
Yes, let's do it.
So right now, what the hydraulic fracture business has really came to a point of trying to be a manufacturing process.
Okay.
And what I mean by manufacturing is that everything needs to go right, back to back to back, cycle times between well swaps, between sand loading, how do we get water to location faster, really drives the cost of the business, which means that, we're trying to stimulate the rock and create all this fractured surface area, but a lot of people are concerned about, costs and the operational complexities regarding this manufacturing process.
Sure.
And sometimes missing the point around creating stimulation effectiveness.
Okay.
So as a responsible hydrocarbon producer and Alberta resident, I want Alberta to see the most out of their resources as possible, which means how can we do more with less?
Yep.
And so I've always been constantly driving for operational perfection. What is the perfect frac? And how do we use real-time data as a catalyst to making decisions in the subsurface that's going to produce more responsibly with less water for the people. So within that kind of long-winded roadmap, there's an opportunity for diagnostics. And the traditional diagnostics are quite expensive to use.
Why is that?
And they're hard to get in real time because you're having to put a bunch of geophones. Geophones are like a seismic monitor within a region, and collecting all that data, which is quite a lot of information, processing it in real time, and then displaying it. Has its challenges.
Sure.
Same thing with fiber optics would be another one. There you're using a distributed fiber. It's really fragile. It's difficult to not break.
Right.
And to start to see these things, you have to plan much further ahead of time and spend all this money, drill your wellbore differently, cement it in place, and then
it's not super cost effective.
Not super cost effective.
Okay.
And then getting that data and making a decision in real time is challenging. Again, the business has really focused on what's the perfect recipe to go in and do over and over again and see better results. But what we see is we have these perfect recipes that go in over and over again, but we have vastly different results.
Interesting.
So philosophically, the only way to then see more consistent results is to then be able to change our recipe based on new data.
Yeah.
Right. So it'd be like, okay, I go to the grocery store, I go buy a loaf of bread, and all of a sudden the baker's got different bread, he uses the same recipe, this bread tastes like shit.
Yeah.
Versus, hey, I want that good bread that you had last time with that different, flour producer.
Yeah.
And the flour, analogy is basically what we have in the subsurface. We've got all these varying rock qualities, even within the same stratigraphic layer.
Okay. Yeah.
So can I build a perfect recipe? My answer is
no.
Not as effective as you'd like to. You can, and it can be, people are doing it and everyone's doing it, and that's status quo. That's the biggest competitor to real-time change is that, hey, I have a recipe that works 50 or 60% of the time. And that's good enough
Typical,
because I can make money.
Typical oil patch, adverse to change and trying new. And
Yeah. But then the real, the real opportunity is, okay, can I kind of respond to these changing subsurface conditions to then drive performance and cost in my business?
Right.
And what we're seeing is that we put a pressure transducer on the wellhead during the fracturing operation. Okay. And my sensor is this distributed fluid antenna, which is the fluid and the proppant that's going in to each of these zones interacting with the rock.
Right.
And so what ShearFRAC's technology does is looks at this interaction between this fluid and the rock mass. And the more we move that rock, the better we're saying we're breaking the rock down. And the two things that we measure are the frequency of how the rock is interacting with the fluid and the relative magnitude of the breaks on how the rock is reacting with the fluid. And based on those two data sets, we can make changes at surface, such as a change in rate or a change in proppant concentration or a change in viscosity to try to influence optimization during the operation.
Got it. Whoa, head spinning. But it's amazing stuff. But so I was just going to ask, how did you come up with the idea?
Well, by no means is it my idea.
Okay. How did you guys?
I've had the opportunity to work with an incredible team.
Sure.
Over the years. And these guys, have each of them like 50 plus years of research in seismic processing and in geology. And the concept was there's information contained in the pressure signature that you're missing.
Right.
And that's it. That you can't just look at, historically what we do to analyze a frac would be what's our breakdown pressure, what's our average treating pressure, and then what's our instantaneous shut-in pressure. And those three pressures would describe how a stage went in addition to, did I pump my fluid, all my fluid and all my proppant?
Yeah.
If I did, next stage,
walk away.
What's next?
There you go.
Right? And so we're just providing a little bit more resolution in the vectors of how you applied your proppant and fluid and how the rock responded to that application. And we can do that both then as a look back, but the real power is in then identifying when we're seeing low efficiency. So if my rock starts breaking down at a specific frequency and I see these events, how do I maintain that effectiveness throughout my entire operation?
Right, yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, but the easiest frac to place is sometimes not always the best. And that's a big challenge, is because you want repeatability. You don't want to screen out because it can cost you a whole bunch of money. And a screen out for the viewers
I was going to stop.
Is basically when you can no longer pump any fluid and proppant in the well because something has prevented your ability to access the wellbore.
That's it.
And we call it screen out because the visual is that sand has packed back into your perforations and you just can no longer push anything else through in that zone. That's it. That's the end.
And this is all super high pressure stuff.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. It can be have impacts to the time that you're on location, have impacts to the performance of the operation, and it's dangerous. I mean, you're operating at very high pressures.
Yeah, it would be dangerous for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and how has the industry been receiving your company and what you can do?
Well, I think that it's like a 10-year overnight success. We're about 6.5 years in, and we've had a tremendous amount of success already to date. Crossing the chasm between the early adopters and the more mainstream fast followers is always challenging. But we are starting to work with more super majors that are seeing the results of the wells. So, 20% plus in the first 12 months of production utilizing the technology versus doing nothing. But production optimization is very difficult to sell. So use cases continue to improve at how our technology fits into the marketplace. We thought that, making all these different changes and trying to drive fracture performance is the highest value. And I still do. I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to recognize that. But with in each subset of the upstream part of an organization, you'll have an asset manager that cares about performance and cost. You'll have a reservoir engineering team that really cares about performance. And you'll have the completions team that really cares about cost. And so there's kind of a mismatch of KPIs of who's driving for what.
Yep.
If I can show a roadmap utilizing the technology for the completions team to say, hey, let's not invest as much money in this stage because it's a crappy stage. Let's try to make a change to improve performance, but which results in cost savings. They're like, I'm all in. And that could be one change on a stage.
Sure.
Say, once I'm 50% of the way through the job and I know this stage is going to be crap, let's make a change from Schedule A to Schedule B and reallocate capital somewhere else. Or just save that capital altogether, which results in the wells being the exact same, if not better production, but a reduction in cost savings, which is instantaneous.
Yeah.
The other application that we've been working on is identifying induced seismicity and casing deformation, which is on the risk side and the asset management side of a completions operation.
Yeah.
And this seems to be of high interest to the industry because if you have a large IS event, which is an earthquake, you can get shut down by the AER depending on the size and magnitude and where you're operating.
Sure.
And not just the Alberta Energy Regulator, but also the
Even higher.
even or in different provinces around the world.
Everywhere.
And we're actually seeing interest in both Canada as well as in the US for this identification process. And so what we're able to see within the pressure signature is an aseismic signature prior to these events taking place. And this is really important. Aseismic means it's not acoustic, where traditional diagnostic techniques cannot pick this up. We're actually able to see it in the pressure signature now, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that's wild. Is that so? That's the system that that's the Richter predictor.
That's Richter predictor.
Richter predictor.
You bet. What a great name, eh?
Oh, it's awesome. I love it. I mean, it's so interesting to me. I would think that would be of interest to a lot, I guess, depending where you are. But do we have earthquakes in Alberta? Like, are there, do we have a lot?
So I mean, as we start to delineate more and more of these acreages, you need specific criteria in order for you to cause earthquakes. In Alberta, it happens more often because of the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains are stressing all of our formations and pushing them to the east. So if you can create any types of slipping or lubrication across larger plains, there is a tendency for these things to slip and cause more earthquakes or casing deformation versus areas that don't have that same sort of stress regime. Maybe you'll still see the same sort of signature. You still are able to lubricate these plains, but you don't have those stresses that are going to be causing casing deformation or induced seismicity. So you need a bunch of perfect criteria. And in Alberta, we experience that quite often.
We do, hey? Yeah. Oh, that's wild. Yeah, I never would have known.
But the goal is to be able to then, identify when these are going to take place and put in enough energy in order to alleviate the stresses within the system. I have a vision that one day I'm going to be able to go and get paid to put $1 billion frac into the San Andreas Fault and slowly alleviate the stress in some of these areas that could cause natural disasters.
Yeah.
And so now we're cross-applying, frac technology, which historically has this, potentially negative aura around it,
connotation,
and put it into a situation where it's actually environmentally friendly and used for good. And I know that's a moonshot idea, but I do think that we have a roadmap and technology to be able to achieve those sort of things. And so when you talk about water contamination, or that our industry is doing negative things to the environment.
Yeah.
I mean, we operate at such a high standard in Canada. It's
bonkers.
It's bonkers. Yeah. Anyone else around the world that wants a really good environmental practice, specifically in oil and gas and drilling techniques, they're looking at Alberta. And I'm really proud of that.
Yeah,
super proud of that.
Yeah, I'm proud too. I try to talk about that as much as I can in here about our safety practices and policies and procedures. Yeah, I agree with you.
And what we're doing is we're doing some rocket science. I mean, we're not grabbing rockets out of the air. But it's getting
drilling
pretty close.
into meteors and sending a drill crew up and maybe doing some high level fracks and
right,
Milky
breaking
Way.
up asteroids to prevent them from colliding with planet Earth. Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, there's a ton of technology and a bunch of passion that goes into it. And most of my team is environmentalists. I mean, we want to see how we do more with less. How do we get responsible hydrocarbon production, and how do we decrease our water impact? I believe that there's a social license to operate that continues to plague oil and gas industry. And this technology that we work on now is going to allow us to continue to frack responsibly for the next 10, 20, 50 years.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it. I mean, good on you. I didn't realize it was already 6 years. You said 6 years in the making now. It's amazing. And you lost all your hair in the process.
Oh yeah,
just
started coming out in chunks.
Yeah, I would imagine it had to be a little stressful for you. So how many people have you got working now? I guess from field to office to.
You bet. So we're about 35 people. We cross in Canada and in the U.S. So we have a headquarters in Houston, Texas, and then a field office in Midland, Texas, where the majority of the operations take place.
Sure.
And then we operate a 24-hour remote operating center out of Calgary, as well as our full software development team is here in Calgary.
Oh, cool. Well, that's exciting. I love it, buddy. And it excites me because, again, I've learned so much just sitting here in the half hour, however long I've been going for it, because I don't understand the frac side now. I think I have a kind of a handle on it. What are your thoughts on shifting gears a little bit?
Sweet.
Energy. Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
No, just with what's going on right now regarding, tariffs and now how all of a sudden there's a big focus. Everybody's talking, well, no, you can't have our resources. And we're, trying to posture like we're not going to give them our resources. Like, what are your thoughts on everything that's going on right now specifically?
Well, for me, it's looking at consolidation.
Yeah.
What we've seen in the market is, Exxon buying Pioneer,
right,
and Chevron and Hess, consolidating. And so I got a text this morning from a good friend of mine in Midland, and she's like, "Yeah, I guess we're going to get cut by another 15 or 20%." And so there's like, for me, the consolidation has been challenging at growing business because you work with some guys, some smaller companies, you make some great wells for them. They get bought by these larger,
entities,
capital-backed entities that are all about driving down cost, and now you're losing a client.
That's right.
And I believe that they will come back, but the sales cycle is quite long, and the volatility is challenging for someone like me trying to bootstrap a technology business. I wish I had more load leveling.
Oh, I like that. I like that poke. That was good. Yeah, from a previous episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so for the tariffs, I mean, I think we're well positioned as a business at ShearFRAC to both operate in Canada and the U.S. And as a new technology company, I mean, I think we probably are only, touching less than 5% of the total market share of wells. So the volumes don't seem to impact my business when someone picks up and decreases drilling rigs as much as a larger operator would see, because we're still in that early adoption timeframe.
For sure. Yeah, and they were talking about this whole consolidation phase was going to occur in the industry. They've been talking about that for years, that this was kind of inevitable. I think especially after the big downturns,
I think the businesses like the E&Ps are showing the service companies kind of the way out. I mean,
it's true.
There's a bunch of people that do data acquisition, and they can do it very well.
Yeah.
And we do data acquisition, but like what I really want to do is build, frac tech.
Right.
I mean, data acquisition is just a component. It's like something that I need to do in order to have confidence in my data. But there's a whole bunch of, really great data pipelines that are out there that the industry can take advantage of.
Yeah.
Where we're doing a redundant job. You can have, my gauge, someone else's gauge, and another third-party gauge on the same well. We're all collecting the same information, but we haven't been able to figure out how to streamline that.
No.
Pretty frustrating there. But there obviously needs to be some consolidation in the service business.
Yeah. Yeah. It had to happen.
Everyone's fighting for scraps. We don't want to run these companies forever. And I think that there's a lot of, 1 + 1 = 3 opportunities out there, which is very exciting. So as much as there's consolidation that ends up hurting the business, I think that there's a clear roadmap for a bunch of other service businesses like myself or technology companies like myself to team up to supply something better. But the expectation, to be honest, in the industry from these clients is a lot. They're like, "Oh, you're a new technology producer. Okay, well, show me that black is black and white is white." And I'm like, "Well, we're kind of in this gray space, and it's difficult to get a lot of commitment as you're developing new products."
Yeah, of course.
And so if I could get on my soapbox and say that, patience and commitment are important to evolving technology in our industry, I would say that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, you get one shot at going into these businesses, and if there's one small thing that is challenging, it's difficult for adoption.
Sure. Well, I would suspect that it would be, you correct me if I'm wrong, you would be targeting the bigger guys that would have more capital to trial run or test, and that are more concerned. They're always pushing the envelope on the environmental and data driven side. Am I right or am I wrong? Are you playing with a lot of smaller guys?
To start, it's a lot of the small guys.
It is the smaller guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's the big companies, they want to be fast followers. Unless you're like getting backed by them, right? Unless you're like part of, Chevron Ventures, then you get an opportunity. But I think that the risk profile in a lot of these larger companies has decreased because of consolidation. I mean, when you get an email saying that, there's 20% layoffs, like you just want to do your job and you don't want to
keep your head down.
You want to keep your head down, right? I remember being there in the past.
Yeah, for sure.
So, we've had a tremendous amount of success with smaller operators, small to midstream guys like that are doing between 20 and 60 wells a year.
Yeah. That's nice. Yeah, that's good.
Versus the super majors that are 300 plus. But you need to get that started, and they're much more nimble. They're easier to react. And they don't have processes in place, right? Like to think about real-time fracturing and real-time decision-making, it can be scary. I think the real-time component or getting towards automation is always interesting discussion, because I've been in a Tesla. Have you been in a Tesla?
I have.
And have you let it driven around?
Oh, you mean with the no driver?
Yeah.
No, I've never done that.
Okay. Well,
that's gotta be incredible.
It's an incredible feeling.
Yeah.
But like you're there strapped in, you say go, and it's driving you around a corner, and you're like, okay, I'm trusting my life in the technology.
Yeah.
But yeah, we still seem to have a challenge doing that for oil and gas.
Taking that leap. Well, we always said it. I always said that too, is our industry is so archaic. Like, I don't know, I feel like I've been saying it for 20 years. Like we're ahead in one way, in many ways on the innovation side, but then we're like, the practices in each sector are always adverse to that change and taking the next step to optimize.
Well,
right?
and we think it's moving to move faster than it is, right? That's why I said 10-year overnight success. I mean, at STEP, we created these diverter product lines, which was like a temporary degradable material to go and block areas that are taking a lot of fluid and try to direct your frac into areas that require higher stress to break.
Yeah.
I had a client last week, I'm not going to name, big client in the US, and they're just trialing diverters for the first time. And this is a product line that I made 10 years ago. So it's crazy how long it takes for people to get comfortable
to catch on,
to try something, because what we're doing now is working. Like hydraulic fracturing was that big game changer.
Yep.
But what's the next step? And I'm trying to always find what's that next step in optimization, what's around the corner. And that's where I think real time is going to take off.
You do, hey? Yeah. Well, you're there. You're just trying to get more work like everybody else.
Totally. Well, and I want to work with more people and continue to learn. I mean, what we know about fracking now is not what we're going to know about fracking in 10 years.
Sure. Yeah, it's going to change.
It's totally going to change. It's already changing.
Well, it's just like when horizontal drilling came in. I mean, that was all brand new. It was like, what? We're going horizontal, and now it's everything.
And there's going to be things I probably say in this podcast that are going to be wrong in 10 years.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah. Well, how closely do you work with this Toronto institute? Makes me curious. How closely do you work with these guys?
Yeah, so we've been sponsoring them for the last 3 years. So I provide a donation to the University of Toronto that they leverage to then fund more people on the research team. When we first joined the consortium, they were looking at acoustic emissions. They were looking at fiber optic strain. They were looking at mapping this movement with rams. And completely within their diagnostic plot, pressure was gone. It was not even considered. And I was like, hey guys, well, what about looking at pressure here? This is my business. Like, let's look at pressure.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden a bunch of light bulbs went off. And, over the last few years, we've been validating that, there's a lot of information contained in the pressure signature that we've historically missed.
Interesting.
And those academic partnerships are critical to building validity in a new technology startup.
Of course,
I think there's a bunch of people that are still concerned that, there's snake oil or there's black box, but like, do I get dressed every day and go into someone's office and try to sell them bullshit?
No. Yeah, of course not. No.
So this is just kind of, it's helping us move the adoption and the trust in the industry along, working with these academic partners. We've also been doing some stuff with the University of Calgary and Dr. Chris Clarkson's team.
Oh, good.
They created a post-fracture pressure decay analysis. So this allows us to get another independent measurement of how well that frac was placed.
Okay.
And we've been able to create it in real time and be able to visualize that stuff. So these academic partnerships, I think, are critical.
Yeah, they're big
to the industry, as well as just getting relationships on how you can integrate into existing workflows.
Yeah.
So there's right now there's like a modeling workflow that goes and predicts what your fracs are going to look like along the lateral. Say this, I'm going to model this frac, and this is what my distribution of fraction looks like.
Okay.
Yeah, but every model that you've ever seen can be right and can be wrong.
Sure.
If we looked at a 50-stage lateral, and that means so there's 50 discrete fracs placed along that lateral. How many stages do you think that frac model actually looks at? And so statistically within a distribution curve, your frac model is going to be right 20 or 30% of the time. And then you're going to have, 30% of the stages that are overperforming that model and 30% of the stages that are underperforming that model.
Okay, got it.
And if you're able to identify those two outliers, you can make decisions that are slightly different during your operation.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of opportunity recognizing that not everything is the same down there.
Right.
And so don't do the same thing.
Well, and this is why you're putting all these big brains together, right? See that you guys can bounce all these ideas off and correct each other when it's wrong or, look for new avenues. Yeah, I think it's a cool thing.
And the opportunity is huge. I mean, for the industry, the opportunity is huge.
Yeah.
On the social license to operate, because, it only takes, one goat fucker to be,
Sure.
I don't need to get into that. And there's a lot of value that we're not recovering. I mean, we're only recovering 10, 15% recovery factors in these unconventional wells, which means that there's still 80+% of the hydrocarbons in place down there that we need to try to get at.
And the UFC side, are they still do you think? I kind of heard over time that they were getting rid of the petroleum courses and tech and I don't know if that's true or not, but I heard that they were whittling away these courses and trying to. Am I right or am I wrong?
I don't know. I can't comment.
Okay.
The guys that I talk to are all petroleum.
They're all petroleum.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay. Well, that's good. That's good. It's encouraging. We want the rest of Canada to know it's kind of important, which they all suddenly agree it is.
But I don't think you need to do a petroleum engineering degree to get into engineering, oil and gas engineering. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. I just it just made me curious when you said working with the UFC. I just wondered how much of that stuff they were doing.
Yeah. I just saw a recent presentation from Professor Per Pedersen, and I think he's a professor of sedimentology at the University of Calgary. It's really interesting what he's done with the Montney outcrops.
Oh, okay.
And mapping it all with drones and going in there and show it's so cool.
Super cool
to see the influence of this rock fabric. And so when I say rock fabric, I was actually just at Fabricland. So this is being hilarious.
Yeah.
It's basically like a 100 thread count sheet versus 1,000 thread count sheet is to think about it.
Yeah.
So within this rock, there's pre-existing fabric that are these weakness planes. And that's due to, the deposition and this long-term maturation of the subsurface. Like things are moving around. You see the Rocky Mountains, everything's squished and compacted. Yeah. And through that process, there's a lot of variability. And so there's some areas that have, 1,000 frac count sheets or thread count sheets.
Yeah.
and some areas that have 100 frac count sheets, even within the same stratigraphic layer, specifically around faults. And, it's a really complex beast down there, which is difficult to model. Sure. But you can start with the models and you can refine them with measurement. And that's the whole catalyst of the business that we've got is how do we refine our existing understanding with low cost measurement. And I think that we're really, really well on the way to becoming more broadly adopted.
Yeah.
And get us to a point where we're spending less and producing more.
Sure. Well, it seems like the industry is being a little more open and open to hearing you out and testing you out. What are some of the companies or your own short-term, long-term goals? Where do you see yourself? Where do you think?
It's a great question. I mean, I'd like to see more market share on how the technology is used.
Yeah.
I'd like us to see a bulk shift in asset performance so that someone can say, hey, this is how we used to do it, and this is what real time has been able to generate for us in an ROI type of fashion.
Yeah.
And I think on the induced seismicity and casing deformation aspect of the business, really getting a more black and white concrete answer of this is starting to take place and you need to do this in order to mitigate it.
Yeah.
A lot of it is exception-based surveillance, right? So you see a specific signature, you see a specific behavior of the job, and it's trained to send a recommendation to the guy in the data van to say, hey, do this and do this now. And building confidence in that workflow that the guys can control and constrain kind of a supervised automation platform.
Yep.
And then obviously get to a point where if it's adopted widely, why wouldn't we just control the machines? So have machine-to-machine control, just like driving a Tesla. Let it drive itself.
Crazy. That's where we're headed with all this stuff, right? Damn AI taking over.
Deep frac.
Deep frac, yeah. Well, that's amazing. I don't know. I think you're doing a fantastic job, and hope to bump into you downtown on the plus 15s, and maybe we can do some collabing. I don't know how or where, but
I'd love that.
do you work closely then with the frac companies? You work do you attack the E&Ps first, or do you attack both simultaneously?
More of the E&Ps are our clients.
E&Ps.
I mean, we have had some great partnerships in the frac domain.
Yeah.
I believe that the Richter predictor and the casing deformation stuff is more interesting to the frac companies because when that stuff happens, their crew sits there and does nothing.
Right.
So on a business side, they'd rather pump their jobs to full and get off and move to the next client so they can continue to keep that asset working.
Yep.
Versus sitting there waiting for issues.
What do they call that? What do they call that in your industry? Waiting on? Like, what is it? Just waiting? Or
stand by.
Stand by.
Yeah.
Stand by.
Hurry up and wait.
Yeah, just everything's acronyms, right?
Hurry up and wait's a good one.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, but most of it's been E&P driven as kind of like, you're providing a service to improve performance or reduce cost, which sometimes is counter to what the frac company is trying to do, which is, place sand and not hurt their equipment and make sure their equipment is improving. So there's different there's different outcomes or different business goals between the E&P provider, which is and the frac company.
Yeah.
And we obviously try to bridge the gap, and depending on the use case, there can be synergies or not.
Yeah. No question. I love it, man. That's great. I'm an official rock frac hound now.
Absolutely.
I'm going to be talking fracs all day tomorrow. Mother fracker. Never dad jokes. You got to do those.
Yeah, I love it.
Anyway, great to see you, Andrew, and best of luck to you out there.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, pal. Talk to you.
Cheers.